All right, let's dive into an incredible story of transformation. We're talking about the birth of the Indian independence movement. It's the story of how a vast land, really a patchwork of different kingdoms and cultures, started to see itself as one single nation, ready to fight for its future.
And that's the big question, isn't it? For centuries, India was this beautiful tapestry of separate kingdoms, different languages, and very local loyalties. So what changed? What was the spark that lit the fire of a unified India in the hearts and minds of millions? Well, to get that, we need to understand one key idea.
So, nationalism, it's not just about living in the same place on a map. It's a feeling, a shared consciousness, you know? It's the sense of belonging to something much bigger than your village or your region. And in India, this feeling didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was forged in the fire of a shared experience under British rule.
Right, so this awakening wasn't some random thing. It was a direct response to a very specific set of conditions. It was actually fueled by British policies that, maybe without meaning to, ended up uniting the people of India against a common ruler. So let's break down what those key catalysts were.
Okay, so the first and maybe biggest cause was just straight-up economic exploitation. People across India started to see that the whole system was set up to make Britain rich, not India. The country's resources were being shipped off to fuel British factories, while back home, Indian peasants, artisans, and craftsmen were getting crushed by crazy high taxes and unfair competition. This economic pain was felt by literally everyone.
And if the economic hardship wasn't enough, then came the policies that just felt like a slap in the face. Lord Lytton's time as viceroy was, well, it was a real flashpoint. I mean, just look at this list. He threw a huge lavish party for Queen Victoria while a terrible famine was raging. He passed a law to silence any criticism in local newspapers. He passed another one to disarm Indians. Each one of these moves just hammered home the idea that Indians were second-class citizens in their own country. You can see how that would add fuel to the fire.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Kind of ironic, actually. The British introduced Western-style education to create a class of Indians who would be loyal clerks and administrators. But what happened instead? They created a whole generation of leaders who were reading about things like liberty, equality, and the American and French revolutions. And these educated Indians, who could now communicate with each other in English and through newspapers, started asking a pretty obvious question. Hey, if these ideas are good enough for you, why aren't they good enough for us?
So you've got all this simmering discontent, this new intellectual energy. It needed a voice, an organization to channel it all. And the first group to step up was a bunch of educated, politically savvy leaders who believed that the best path forward was slow, steady reform. They became known as the Early Nationalists, or the Moderates. And here are some of the key figures. Leaders like Surendranath Banerjee, Sir Firoza Shah Mehta, and Gopal Krishna Gokhale. These guys were the architects of this early phase. They were brilliant lawyers, journalists, scholars, and they truly believed they could persuade the British government to give Indians more rights, just by using logical arguments and constitutional methods. They were definitely playing the long game.
Their whole strategy became known as the 3 Ps: petitions, prayers, and protests. See the pattern? It's all very methodical, very non-confrontational. It was all based on this fundamental belief in the British sense of justice and fairness. They weren't screaming for independence just yet. They were asking for a fair seat at the table within the empire. But as you can imagine, progress was slow. And for some, patience was starting to wear very, very thin.
And sure enough, by the early 1900s, a new generation of leaders comes onto the scene, and they were completely fed up with the moderate slow pace. They saw the 3 Ps as basically a begging bowl approach. This new group, well, they had a totally different philosophy and a much, much more radical goal. They were the Assertive Nationalists. And these are the faces of that shift. Lal-Bal-Pal. This trio, Lalai Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Bipin Chandra Pal, represented a seismic shift in the movement. They had zero faith in British justice. Their belief was simple. Freedom isn't something you politely ask for. It's something you demand. And if you have to, you fight for it. And this was their one-word mission statement: Swaraj. Not just a few more reforms, not just more autonomy within the empire. No, they wanted complete self-rule, complete independence. This was a massive departure from what the moderates were asking for, and it just completely changed the game. Just look at this breakdown. It lays out the divide so clearly.
On one side, you've got the early nationalists, the moderates. They wanted autonomy, they used petitions, they believed in British fairness, and their support came from the educated elite. On the other side, the assertives. They demanded total Swaraj, they wanted direct action, they rejected British rule completely, and they wanted to bring the masses into the fight. This wasn't just a disagreement over tactics, it was a clash of two totally different visions for India's future.
So, you have these two camps, right? The moderates and the assertives. The tension is building. All it needed was one big event, one single flashpoint to just blow the whole thing wide open. And that flashpoint came from a decision by the British Viceroy, Lord Curzon, a decision that would prove the assertives were right and change the freedom struggle forever.
The year was 1905. The event was the Partition of Bengal. Now, you have to get this. At the time, Bengal was the absolute nerve center of Indian nationalism. It was a hotbed of political thought and activity, and the British plan was brutally simple. Cut it in half. Officially, the British said, "Oh, Bengal is just too big to manage efficiently. This is just an administrative change." But Indian leaders saw right through that. This was the classic British policy of divide and rule in action. The real goal was to shatter the heart of the nationalist movement by splitting Bengal along religious lines and hopefully turn Hindus and Muslims against each other. But the plan backfired royally. Instead of dividing people, the partition of Bengal united them like never before. A wave of outrage just swept through the province. Protests exploded everywhere. We're talking merchants, lawyers, students, workers, farmers. People from every single walk of life came together in this massive, unified act of defiance. So all this anger, all this new energy, it had to go somewhere. And it was channeled into a new and incredibly powerful form of political action. It wasn't just about meetings and petitions anymore. The anti-partition anger gave birth to the Swadeshi movement, a whole new phase of direct, mass-based struggle. And the strategy was as simple as it was brilliant. It had two parts. First, Swadeshi, which just means of one's own country. The idea was to encourage Indians to use goods made in India. And the second part, boycott, was its mirror image, actively refuse to buy British stuff. It was a 1-2 punch of building economic self-reliance and hitting the British right where it hurts, their wallets. And let me tell you, this boycott was all-encompassing. It wasn't just about not buying English cloth or sugar. It grew to include boycotting government schools, courts, and official positions. There was even a social boycott of anyone who kept buying foreign goods. It was a movement that touched every single part of daily life. And nothing, nothing, captured the raw emotion of the movement like this. People would gather in town squares and build these huge bonfires of foreign-made goods. This wasn't just a protest. It was a ritual. It was a powerful, public, and passionate rejection of British rule, with the flames lighting up the sky. Just an incredible symbol. And this, right here, is the most important takeaway. The Swadeshi movement completely changed the DNA of the freedom struggle. What had, for a long time, been a movement led by educated elites was now a genuine mass movement. Students, women, city dwellers, rural farmers, everybody was in. The fight for freedom was now everybody's fight. So, a new era had dawned. The people of India were mobilized and had found their political voice. The goal of Swaraj was no longer a fringe idea. It was front and center. But that split between the moderates and the assertives, it had grown into a massive canyon. The leadership was fractured, so it left everyone with one huge hanging question. With the movement's leaders so deeply divided, who on earth was going to lead this newly awakened nation?